Hi everybody, welcome to week 3. So last week in the last couple of weeks, we've talked about rhythm and meter, and this week we're going to add a third ingredient, and that is rhyme. So let's jump into it. So after this lesson, you'll be able to differentiate between external and internal rhymes. You'll be able to describe single, double, and triple rhymes. You'll be able to identify imperfect rhymes and explain the psychology behind the appeal of rhyme. We'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll just start with the basic rhyme. There are two basic types of rhyme, external and internal. External rhyme is what you typically think of when you hear of rhyme. These are things, words or syllables that have the same end sound. So for example, O hushed October morning mild, thy leaves have ripened to the fall. Tomorrow's wind, if it be wild, should waste them all. So you can hear the rhymes at the end of each of those lines, right? Mild and wild, fall and all. So that's an external rhyme, but we also have something called internal rhyme. So rhymes don't have to fall at the end of a line. They can appear anywhere within a line. So take a look at this. Hey Jude, don't be afraid. You were made to go out and get her. The minute you let her under your skin, then you begin to make it better. So if you look at the pattern here, this is a little bit more complicated than what we saw with Robert Frost, right? We have afraid and made, and we have skin and begin appearing at the same points. And we got get her and let her appearing at the same points in each line, right? Afraid at the very end, and then made in the middle of the next line. Get her at the very end, let her in the middle of the next line. Skin at the very end, begin in the middle of the next line. And notice we finished with better, which rhymes with get her, and creates an overarching external rhyme, an end rhyme for at the end of the second line, at the end of the fourth line. So this one actually combines internal and external rhyme, but it's chiefly internal rhyme. So as I said, when two words rhyme, we typically think of them as having the same end sound. So let's start with single rhymes. So for example, face and place, toy and joy, talk and walk. You can hear how these sound like rhymes, right? Fired and tired. So each one of these is a single syllable word that rhymes each with the other. So what you notice is everything starting from the vowel sound until the end of the word has the same sound. So ace and ace, oi and oi, awk and awk, ired and ired. And now for fired and tired, if you're wondering, you might think like fired and tired, that kind of sounds like two syllables. These are kind of a special case. If you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find that the I-R-E sound is considered one single vowel sound in English. So when you have an R at the end of a vowel sound, it is part of the vowel sound. So for example, R, or, air, and then a sound like ire. It's a really long vowel sound because it's a diphthong, I, combined with an R sound, ire, but it's considered one vowel. And that D at the end, the D sound, remember we talked about that in week 1, don't think of an ED at the end of a word as creating a new vowel sound. So anyway, fired, tired, those are both single rhymes. Take a look at this one though. Extend, pretend. So these are both single rhymes as well. And now you might wonder, you might think like, well, how are these single rhymes? Because these are actually 2-syllable words. So this would have to be a double rhyme. This is a single rhyme because the part that rhymes starts with this stressed vowel sound, E-N-D. And what comes before it, the EXT or the PRET, those are not part of the rhyme. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. I need some water. All right. And lastly, resolute with a flute. So he was resolute with a flute, we might say. So in this case, we've got a 3-syllable word, an anapest, resolute. The lute is the stressed syllable there. And then flute is the stressed syllable in that phrase, that 3-word phrase with a flute. So in this case, excuse me, we can combine this L-U-T-E, the last syllable of a 3-syllable word with a single syllable word and still get a rhyme. So you don't have to, you're not limited to rhyming single syllable words with single syllable words or triple syllable words with triple syllable words or anything like that. Just pay attention to the stressed syllables at the end of a line if you're thinking about end rhymes. So those are single rhymes. Let's take a look at double rhymes. So double rhymes will have 2 syllables, and they start with a stressed syllable and finish with an unstressed syllable. Remember that stressed syllable well, never mind, I don't want to say anything about that. So waiter and later, those are double rhymes. Those words rhyme perfectly because we've got the same vowel sounds. Aider. Everything from the first stressed vowel sound to the end of the word is identical. That makes it a perfect double rhyme. Bury and carry. Walking and talking. Unstable and table. So those double rhymes are all the same kind of pattern there. Take a look at triple rhymes. Cantaloupe, antelope. So it's the same thing as we had before, but again, this is a triple rhyme, not a double or a single rhyme, because the last 3 syllables all rhyme together, and they begin with a stressed syllable and finish with 2 unstressed syllables. Spaciously, graciously. Potentially, deferentially. So like I said, so far we've been looking at perfect rhymes here. We're not really talking about imperfect rhymes yet. We're talking about perfect rhymes. So notice from here in the word cantaloupe and antelope, every single sound starting with that A sounds exactly the same. If you take off the C here, antelope, antelope, it sounds 100% the same. So everything's identical starting from the stressed syllable on. That's what we consider a perfect rhyme. But we have other types of rhymes too. So there are imperfect rhymes. And so you guys did this as part of your homework for week 1. I asked you guys to look up some definitions and do a little research so you can get familiar with different resources available to you online. So you're not just, so you know that even when this class is over, you can continue to, to develop your poetic skills and engage in, education of poetry. But so assonance is the identical vowel sounds. So for example, fired and wires. So these are not a perfect rhyme because even though they have the same vowel sound, ire, this one finishes with ired and this one finishes with ires. So they're not exactly a perfect rhyme, but they're pretty close. And what's close about them is the vowel sound. Take a look at the next one, extend, intense. Those might not sound like they rhyme, but they are an imperfect rhyme. They're assonant. So extend, we have the E sound, vowel sound, and it finishes with ND. Intense, we have the E vowel sound, and it finishes with NSE. So slightly different. I want to compare, what if we had a third word here? So extend, intense, and let's say bet. So extend, intense, bet. Those are all single rhymes, right? They just have one stressed syllable. They all have an E sound, but you probably feel that there's a little more assonance between extend and intense and a little less assonance between extend and bet. And that has to do with the N sound that's in both of these vowels, both of these syllables, that extends I want to say consonants, but that's a very specific word we're going to look at. The harmony, it extends the harmony between those two words in a way that there's a little less harmony between extend and bet. There's still a little bit of harmony, the sound, but the harmony, that's where the harmony stops. Whereas here in extend and intense, there's a little bit more prolonged harmony. Spaciously, pay to see. So if we take a look at this one, spaciously, so here we have a triple rhyme, starting with the stressed syllable spaciously. And you might look at this one and say, like, how does that rhyme with this one? Because when I say pay to see, I would stress both of those words, pay and see. And in spaciously, I only stress the first one. Well, if we've got a 3-syllable word like this, a dactyl, right, stressed in the beginning and then 2 unstressed syllables, creating a pattern, and this pay to see follows up with that pattern, it can reinforce the feeling of the rhyme. You might also say these words pay to see, and you might pronounce them if you're overthinking it maybe, or focusing really on enunciation, you might pronounce these words pay to see and make an ooh sound when you get to 2. In this word, spaciously, think about what the 3 vowel sounds are. A, E. Spaciously, A, E. In this one, pay to see, if you make a 2 sound, pay to see, A, U, E. That's slightly different. A, U, E, those are not identical vowel sounds to A, E. This one's an and this one's an oo, right? But think about stress at the sentence level when we take a look at a phrase in context. If I just say the word to, T-O, to, then yeah, I make a really clear, strong ooh sound. I draw out that long vowel sound. However, in conversation or when I'm reading a line of poetry or a line from a sentence, I wouldn't actually enunciate that ooh sound there because to is not a content word, it's a function word. It's a preposition. It's one of those words that we tend to reduce, like or the or in or at, etc. So what that means is, pronunciation-wise, we draw out these vowels A and E, but we reduce the oo sound, and it transforms into what's called a schwa, or an sound. The sound is the sound of the mouth at rest, when the tongue is not, so the tongue is a muscle, and each vowel is your muscle kind of flexing or stressing itself in a certain direction, right? E is your tongue pushing itself a little far forward. Ooh, ooh is when you pull your tongue a little bit back. So you're exerting some control over the direction of your tongue with each of these vowel sounds. But that sound is when your tongue is completely at rest. So for that reason, when we have unstressed syllables like the TO in pay to see, we don't really say pay to see, but we say pay to see, pay to see. So spaciously, pay to see makes the same, makes for an assonant sound between the 2 of them. Take a look at these words: waiter, major, makers, late nurse. Each one of these words has the same vowel sounds in each one of them. A-er, 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 A-er. But you might have noticed that these 2, waiter and major, sound a little bit more assonant, a little bit more harmony between the 2 of them than, say, for example, makers and late nurse, or waiter and late nurse. Part of it has to do with the stress pattern, right? So notice with late nurse, there's going to be 2 stresses. This is a spondy, whereas these other words, waiter, major, and makers, are trochees. So, so if you think about assonance, rhyme, things like that, the perfect rhyme, the vowel sounds and the consonant sounds, those are just one element of harmony between words. And so stress, we'll take a look at other things that also make it make those things more or less harmonious the more you employ them within a line or within a rhyme scheme. Next we have consonants. So consonants is identical consonant sounds. So for example, life and carafe. You might think those words don't rhyme at all, and they really don't. Consonants is not as harmonious as assonance is. We tend to notice the repeated vowel sounds more than we notice the repeated consonant sounds. But still, repeated consonant sounds are They are consonant, they're harmonious, they're a type of rhyme. So the words life and carafe, they rhyme, it's just a really weak rhyme. Suppose and pies, close, breathes, quicken, and maken. So in each one of these, we've got an imperfect rhyme. We've got the consonants going on here. They both finish with these similar consonant sounds, but notice that in each one of them, O and I, O and E, I and A, we've got different vowel sounds. Now these ones finish with the same vowel sound, quicken, maken. They both end with a schwa sound, un. However, we would not, even though they finish with the same schwa sound, we would not consider them a perfect rhyme because that last syllable is not stressed. And so perfect rhymes are determined starting from that stressed syllable. So this one, I is the vowel sound, and it in, and here we have a in. So we got different vowel sounds between those two words. All right, so we've got all these different types of rhymes, right? And it's fun to categorize them and to, recognize different terms for them so that we can talk about them and think about how they're being used in our own writing and in the writing that we're reading. But why do they even exist? Like, what do rhymes do? What are they there for? Well, to think about this, I want to take a step back and I want to take a look at something called cognitive fluency theory, which you may not know that by that name, but I bet you've heard of it before. So cognitive fluency theory stipulates that structural features of language affect emotional and aesthetic processing. Emotional and aesthetic processing means when we're processing information, right? How does it make us feel? And how does it look to us? Does it look beautiful? Does it look threatening? Does it look annoying? Does it look like something I don't want to spend my time on? And this has become a really significant theory in the world of marketing. And this is where you've probably heard of this before. So if we take a look at Federal Express, that company doesn't exist as we know it anymore. It's still the same company. They weren't like bought out by anybody, but they rebranded themselves. Federal Express apparently was too much of a mouthful for today's consumers, right? We don't have enough time to say Federal Express, 5 syllables. The wasted cognitive energy trying to enunciate all of those syllables just to talk about where I'm going to ship my package. Let's just call it FedEx, where we have a simple 2-syllable, 1 stress unit of language, much more convenient. And so the theory here is that this appeals to the reader, to the consumer, to whomever, makes them feel better about the company, makes them feel more, it's more pleasing to the eye, pleasing to the ear, to think about FedEx as opposed to think about Federal Express. Kentucky Fried Chicken has been for well over a decade, I think, has been known as KFC, right? But back in the day, it was called Kentucky Fried Chicken. That is a mouthful of syllables, lots of k sounds, which is cool, like that's consonant, but KFC is just much easier and much more effortless to produce. And so according to cognitive fluency theory, for marketing purposes at least, this is much more preferable. And I say even Walmart, like take a look at this, because Walmart rebranded itself and Walmart is still Walmart. It sounds exactly like it used to. Nothing has changed with the sound of the language, but there's still a structural feature of this language that Walmart decided was, maybe they did focus groups and testing and all this stuff and decided, you know what, people are really just uncomfortable with the hyphen that we have in our name. And let's call ourselves Walmart. One word. Let's wordify our name. So this cognitive fluency theory. This is just essentially, and this is why I say you've heard of this before, because I'm sure you've noticed and had conversations at some point about these different, rebrandings that have happened. And you can probably think of some more. The Facebook changing to just Facebook, for example. But so in any event, according to cognitive fluency theory, the structural features of language, they have an effect on the emotional aesthetic processing. Now, don't get the impression from this that that means good poetry is reduces its language and takes things like Federal Express and Kentucky Fried Chicken and reduces them to FedEx and KFC. That's if all you want to do is write marketing copy, then yes, that is what you should do. If you're working on logos, then that is good advice. But if you're working on poetry, it's not necessarily the case that simpler is better. What we want to take away from this idea as poets is simply that the structural features of language have an effect on emotional aesthetic processing. And so more complicated structural features of language in poetry, it can be a good thing sometimes if we want to make our reader work, if we want to make our reader think through something, if the topic or the subject that we're working on is one of that level of complexity or depth. Or another way to think about that is if the section of the poem that we're working on, if in this stanza I'm talking about it from a certain perspective, that I want it to appear more complex, I want to make my reader wrestle more, then I'm going to start choosing more structurally complex bits of language, words, grammatical structures, etc., and I'm going to make my reader do the work. But then there may be other sections in my poem, or there may be other poems altogether. Maybe I want to write the entire poem in just really simple sing-song type of language. And that's fine. That's going to affect the emotional aesthetic processing that the reader has as they experience, whether it's reading it on the page, reading it out loud, hearing it read to them. So all of these things have an effect. There are some things in poetry that I'm thinking about. A poem that I was writing the other day where the grammar of one stanza is so convoluted and complex because I really wanted to make my reader like work and think at that time. And a reader, I was reading it out loud just to kind of like hear what it sounded like. And if I went to like an open mic night or something like that, that one stanza would not be intelligible to the audience just because it's so convoluted in the grammar. It needs to be picked apart, something like that. Most of the poem is not like that, but I chose that for that one section. So these are the kind of like thought processes that you can engage in as you're making choices about how you want to arrange the words and the language and everything in your poems. So for this assignment, the poetry project that your first draft is due this week, one of the stipulations in the assignment is that a certain percentage of your lines have to be metered and rhyming. So when we're talking about rhyming, bear in mind, rhyming does not necessarily mean, go all the way back here, does not necessarily mean that you have to have it full of face, place, toy, joy, talk, walk, fired, tired. It doesn't have to be, the last word of every line has to rhyme or anything like that. You can use internal rhymes. You can use assonance and consonants. So I'm just going to be looking for these kinds of just intentional structuring of language. That's the rhyme that I'm looking for as I'm going to be evaluating your poetry projects, just to determine whether they're satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And if they're unsatisfactory, I'll just point out and say I can't discern any sort of pattern going on in here, and maybe you have to write an explanation as part of the assignment too, right? So then if I still read that and I still can't pick out what's going on in there, then we'll just talk about it and we'll figure it out, and maybe there'll be some revisions to do for that. But I'm not looking for necessarily like a Dr. Seuss. Doesn't have to be like a whole 500 words of Dr. Seuss. Do as much Dr. Seuss as you want. I just think most people are probably not looking to write that many words of sing-song poetry. But you can do whatever you want. But so looking at the psychology of this, so of this cognitive theory. So in a scientific study by Obermeyer et al., and I got the link down here at the bottom if you want to look it up. But this is what they say about rhyme. So they did a study where they had people respond to how the different lines of text made them feel. And so rhymes significantly influenced liking, intensity, perceived emotion, as well as felt emotion ratings, with rhyming stanzas leading to a more positive aesthetic and emotional evaluation. So what that means is when people read things that rhymed, they reported that they liked it more. They felt whatever it made them feel more deeply. So if it made them feel sad, the rhyming one made them feel sadder. If it made them feel hopeful, the rhyming one made them feel more hopeful. And they believed that the author's emotions were more deeply held. They felt that this was coming from a stronger or wiser or more profound source when they rhymed. So that's pretty cool. We can harness this power in our language. Um, so let's test it out. So here's a poem by Shakespeare. It's Sonnet 27. So I'll read it and tell me, or you can't really tell me, you're not here, but but think about how much does it make you feel strongly? Weary with toil, I haste me to my sleep. The dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my mind, to work my mind when body's work is done. For then my thoughts, from far where I abide, intend a zealous pilgrimage to you, and keep my drooping eyelids wide alert, looking on darkness which the blind do see, save that my soul's imaginary sight presents thy shadow to my sightless view, which, like a jewel hung in a ghastly eve, makes black night beauteous and her old face young. Lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself can never rest. Cool, interesting. Now let's listen to this. Weary with toil, I haste me to my bed, the dear repose for limbs with travel tired. But then begins a journey in my head, to work my mind when body's work's expired. For then my thoughts, from far where I abide, intend a zealous pilgrimage to thee, and keep my drooping eyelids open wide, looking on darkness which the blind do see. Save that my soul's imaginary sight presents thy shadow to my sightless view, which, like a jewel hung in ghastly night, makes black night beauteous and her old face new. Lo, thus by day my limbs, by night my mind, for thee and for myself no quiet find. So much more powerful, so much more profound, right? I mean, there may be some words and some portions in there that you need to kind of pick apart grammatically to understand what they're saying the first time you hear them. There's some objects before verbs and subjects after. There's some kind of messed up grammar in there for the sake of a tighter rhyme scheme like this. But the first one just kind of sounded like a journal entry, like I was writing in my journal before I went to bed or something like that, right? There is an iambic meter here. There's iambic pentameter, but it comes out so much more strongly in the second one, and you can start to feel the connections between the lines and between the ideas, aided by that rhyme scheme, that repetitive rhyme scheme throughout the sonnet on the right. At least that's my experience. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. So as you are working on your assignments this week, think about, use your, rhyming dictionary, the rhymezone.com. Use the dictionary.com, use that to look up the stress patterns of the words that you're working with. Look up also, use a thesaurus also. Make sure that you're looking up different words. So you might have, maybe you are doing some end rhymes like we have here on Sonnet 27, and maybe you get to a certain end rhyme, but there's just, you can't think of a word that rhymes with it. So that's okay. Just think of a different word, whatever word just makes sense in that context, and put that word in. Then go to your thesaurus and look up that word in the thesaurus and see if you can find another word that has at least has like an assonant vowel sound, or maybe some consonants with the consonant sounds. That's one nice way to kind of get through that issue with your poetry. All right. The other thing I want to say real quick too is, as you're going into your poetry assignments and kind of polishing them up and getting them ready for submission this week, I think one thing to think about is what types of, when we talked about last week the different types of meter, right? Iambic, trochaic, anapestic, and dactylic. Which meters are you using for your poetry and why? And keep in mind, you don't have to make an entire poem, doesn't have to be all the same meter. So in this poem, Sonnet 27, sure, it's all iambic pentameter, but that doesn't mean that you have to make everything in your poem be the same meter. So you could write a poem that starts off in maybe dactylic, maybe it's a kind of a, like a heavy but detached kind of feeling for whatever, wherever you start with this poem. And then maybe it moves into a darker, even heavier kind of place. And so maybe you'll move from dactylic to trochaic meter, and you make it more, make it even kind of heavier, darker there. Then maybe move to iambic meter from trochaic, because maybe you still want to have it be stable and recurring, but maybe not as falling with the energy. Now you want the energy kind of rising as you're kind of reaching to your conclusion. So maybe you switch it up and go over to iambic. And then maybe you want to finish on a high note. And so you move from that iambic, that, the steady and recurring, but and kind of stable, but also rising energy, and move to anapestic and have a really kind of light and floaty while also being rising type of feeling. That type of rhyme scheme structure, sorry, not rhyme scheme, that type sort of metrical structure, if you were to create one like that, I mean, that would be appropriate for a poem whose thematic content had to do with maybe like, falling and then like rising from the ashes type of feeling, or like a being born again type of feeling, or type of theme. That would be a good setup for that. Start really dark and heavy, and then kind of grind to the depths of the earth, and then kind of rise on the upswing, or vice versa. So everything's going great in the beginning, and then something terrible happens. You can use those aspects of language to reflect that. So I encourage you guys, have fun with your poetry this week, play around with it. Definitely come see me for office hours or send me an email. I'm happy to give you guys some feedback as y'all are polishing it up. But once you submit your assignments it's going to be due on the 11th, your poetry projects, once you get those turned in, I'm going to provide feedback on those, and then that'll help you just to get ready for the final poetry project, which is much later in this quarter. But we want to get our drafts in now so you can get feedback from me, and you can be thinking about it and continue to revise it over the course of the next month or so until we get to the poetry workshop, which isn't going to be until November. So if you guys have any questions, I look forward to hearing them. Please contact me. Otherwise, I will talk to you all this week. Have a good one.